welcome to the series of video lectures on the subject Programming with Java for third year electronics students. I am Dr. Shrishail Gajbhar, Assistant Professor, Department of Electronics Engineering, Walchand Institute of Technology, Solapur. Now, today I am going to introduce you to a new concept in Java which is called interfaces. Now, the topic of today's discussion or today's session will be on interfaces in Java. Now this session is of the introductory level, and at the end of this session students will be able to know what are interfaces, now why they are used in the programming, and students should be able to implement interfaces of their own. Now what are interfaces first? An interface is basically a kind of class. Now what is a class? As all of you know, in C++ there is a concept of class, and which is an object oriented programming concept. A class has methods and data variables, are also called as instance variables. Now class is nothing but a blueprint to create objects which are real world in some sense. Now in classes, as I have told earlier, there are methods and data variables. Now similar to the classes, an interface will also have these kind of features, that is instance variables and methods, but there is a major difference. Now what is that difference? Interfaces only define abstract methods and final variables, which are also called as constants. Now they just define what a class must do, and there is no implementation at all. There are no instance variables, no constructors, method definitions at all. Now, let us go some in detail about interfaces. A class that implements an interface defines each specified method. Now, writing an interface is a way for a class designer to specify methods of their choice for another programmer. Implementing an interface is a way for a programmer to guarantee that a class defines why interfaces are introduced in Java. Java does not support multiple inheritance of C++. Then you are aware that in C++ there is a concept called multiple inheritance. Now, but Java does not support multiple inheritance. So, to replace this multiple inheritance concept in C++, Java has introduced interfaces. Now interfaces help to realize multiple inheritance. A class can implement more than one interface exhibiting multiple inheritance. As you can see in the figure there are interface 1, 2 and 3, and class multi implements all three interfaces, interface 1, interface 2 and interface 3. Now this class multi has to define each method of this interface, which you and think for 2 minutes and write down your thoughts on why Java does not support multiple inheritance. Okay, I will tell you the answer. Now suppose there is one class, and from that class there are two classes which are inherited. Now from these two classes, let us say there is one more derived class. Now this current class has two copies of the same method, and the compiler doesn't know which method to call at which time. So there is an ambiguity when you are using the current class object to call that method. So it's quite ambiguous or confusing for a programmer. So in Java they have not supported this multiple inheritance feature. Now how do we define interfaces? The general form of defining interfaces is like that. You generally write down a modifier first, then interface is the keyword. If name is the name of that interface. Final is the keyword to define the constant. As I have already told you that we can only define the constants as an instance variable. Similarly, methods can have the return type, and there is only signature. Means what? We are not going to implement any method, we are just giving the skeleton. Let us see one example. Now in this case, an interface calculation is defined. Now here a double pi is defined as 3.142, right? As all of you know, the value of the pi is 3.142, and in order to decide it as a constant, we have to write this final keyword. Now the method, here the modifier is double and the method name is area, and the argument is double r, that is radius. Now, how to implement an interface? Now, the general form for implementing an interface is that you generally write down the modifier, then the class keyword, then the class name, and you write down it implements keyword and interface name. Like as I told earlier, a class can implement more than one interfaces. So interface 1, 2 and n, and there is a body also. Now let us see one example of class implementing an interface. Now I have already defined a interface named as calculation. Now here the class circle implements calculation. Here public double area double x, right? Public is the modifier, double ar is the variable defined, and ar is equal to pi x square, and return ar. Now one thing you note here, that when an interface method is implemented in a class, it must be declared as public. Now let us see one more example. A class peer also implements calculation, and here you can see the format as public double area double x. Double x is the argument, and double surface area is equal to 4 pi x square, and return surface area. So one thing you can know here, that in interface we only define the return type, that is double area and double r, but a class which implements this interface has to define this method, right? We have seen in circle this double area had different statements, and in sphere this statement. Now all of you are aware of what are interfaces and how to implement it and why they are used. Now based on the content which you have studied, write down a Java program that finds square root and logarithm using the concept of interface. Now here you can define the interface in this fashion. Here you can define interface math function, and here you can write void display integer x. Now these are the references which you can use